Hey guys, it's ZLR here, and today I'm going to be doing my Week 5 recap of the NFL season. And, oh my god, Robert, holy shit. NFL breaking news, Jets fire Robert Saleh. Oh my god. Oh, and we're starting off with a really good Thursday night game as the Buccaneers went up against the Falcons, with the Falcons winning it 36-30 in overtime. And like I said, pretty good game. We have Baker Mayfield completing 19 passes out of 24 for 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rachaad White had 10 carries for 72 yards. Bucky Irvin had 9 carries for 44 yards. Baker Mayfield had 6 carries for 42 yards. And Chris Godwin had 1 carry for 2 yards. Chris Godwin also had 5 receptions for 64 yards. Mike Evans had 5 receptions for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cade Otton had 3 receptions for 44 yards. We had Bucky Irving catching it twice for 12 yards. Sterling Shepard had 1 catch for 4 yards and a touchdown. And Rachaad White had 3 catches but lost 6 yards because of it. We had Kirk Cousins, 42 completions out of 58 attempts, 509 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a interception. Darnell Mooney attempted to throw the ball but didn't complete the pass. We had Bijan Robinson with 12 carries, 61 yards, and Tyler Algier had 6 carries for 12 yards. We had Drake London with 12 receptions, 154 yards, holy shit, and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney had 9 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts had 7 receptions for 88 yards. We had Kaderil Hodge with 2 receptions for 67 yards. Ray McLeod with 6 receptions for 66 yards. 666 in October. Oh god. Oh boy. We also had Bijan Robinson with 3 receptions for 16 yards, and Tyler Algier with 3 receptions for 13 yards. Then we have the Jets and the Vikings, and the intro of this video literally had me when I was literally starting the intro. I had to cut it out, and I had to cut some things out. I had to cut a lot of it, but you at least got to see my reaction to it. So, yeah, Robert Saleh firing, holy crap. But anyway, the Vikings won 23-17 to stay undefeated, and this one was a pretty decent game too. I mean, both quarterbacks really didn't have the best game, but I do not blame them. Aaron Rodgers, 29 completions out of 54 attempts for 244 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. We had Breece Hall with 9 carries for 23 yards, Braylon Allen with 5 carries for 13 yards, Garrett Wilson with 13 receptions, 101 yards, and a touchdown. We had Tyler Conklin with 6 receptions for 55 yards. Allen Lazard had 4 receptions for 34 yards and a touchdown. If I didn't mention that Garrett Wilson had the touchdown, I'm sorry. Mike Williams, 2 receptions, 25 yards. We had Braylon Allen with 1 reception for 15 yards. And Breece Hall with, god damn it, 3 receptions for 14 yards. My phone thought I clicked on the name of Braylon Allen. Then we had the Vikings side of things. Sam Darnold, 14 completions out of 31 attempts, 179 yards, and a interception. Nick Mullins had one completion out of one attempt for 24 yards. Ty Chandler had 14 carries, 30 yards. Aaron Jones had 7 carries, 29 yards. Sam Darnold had 5 carries for 11 yards. CJ Ham had 2 carries, 10 yards, and a touchdown. And we had Myles Gaskin with 2 carries for 2 yards. Then we had Justin Jefferson, 6 receptions, 92 yards. Jordan Addison with 3 receptions for 36 yards. Johnny Munt with 2 receptions for 31 yards. Aaron Jones with 1 reception for 24 yards. Myles Gaskin. I don't know why I said Michael. 1 reception for 11 yards. And Ty Chandler with 2 receptions for 9 yards. Also, I never knew this, but Woody Johnson, this is his first firing of a head coach in his 25 years of being the owner of the Jets. And honestly, that's pretty crazy to think about. Then we had the Bears and the Panthers, with the Bears winning this one 36-10. And Jesus Christ, Panthers, I don't know at this point. I thought it was Bryce Young. Definitely not Bryce Young at this point. It's that whole entire offense. But anyway, Andy Dalton, 18 completions out of 28 attempts for 136 yards and 8 interception. Bryce Young, 4 completions out of 7 attempts for 58 yards. Chuba Hubbard had 13 carries for 97 yards and a touchdown. Bryce Young had 1 carry for 8 yards. Deontay Johnson had 2 carries for 6 yards. Miles Sanders also had 2 carries for 6 yards. And Andy Dalton had 1 carry for 3 yards. That is a lot of receivers. Holy shit. Alright, so Jalen Coker, I think, or Coker. I'm gonna go with Coker there. 4 receptions for 68 yards. Jonathan Mingo with 2 receptions for 37 yards. Miles Sanders with 2 receptions for 27 yards. Deontay Johnson with 3 receptions for 23 yards. Jatavion Sanders with 3 receptions for 13 yards. We had David Moore with 2 receptions for 13 yards. Xavier Leggett with 1 reception for 8 yards. We also had Tommy Tremble with 1 reception for 7 yards. And Chuba Hubbard had 4 receptions but had -2 yards because of it. Holy crap. Caleb Williams, 20 completions out of 29 attempts for 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. We had DeAndre Swift with 21 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. Caleb Williams had 5 carries for 34 yards. Rashawn Johnson had 10 carries for 25 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Tyson Bagent had 3 carries but had -4 yards. DJ Moore had 5 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cole Kmet had 3 receptions for 57 yards. DeAndre Swift had 2 receptions for 47 yards. Rome Odunze had 5 receptions for 40 yards. We had Keenan Allen with 3 receptions for 33 yards. And Gerald Everett with 2 receptions for 22 yards. Then we had the Washington Commanders go up against the Browns, with the Commanders winning this one 34-13. we had Deshaun Watson complete 15 passes out of 28 attempts for 125 yards and a touchdown. Jameis Winston was in there for a completed pass out of one attempt for 16 yards. We had Jerome Ford with 9 carries for 47 yards. We had Donta Foreman with 9 carries for 44 yards. We had Deshaun Watson with 3 carries for 14 yards. Pierre Strong Jr. with 1 carry for 2 yards. And Jameis Winston carried the ball once but didn't gain any yards. He actually lost yards with -3. Sorry about the random cut right there. Oh boy, my hood is all fucked up right there. But anyway, yeah, sorry about that cut. There was a little issue with my computer, but I got fixed. But Amari Cooper, 4 receptions for 60 yards. We had Jordan Atkins with 3 receptions, 22 yards, and a touchdown. Donta Foreman had 1 reception for 16 yards, as well as Jerry Jeudy. I almost said Jarrell Jeudy. I don't know why. David Njoku had 1 reception for 14 yards. We had Elijah Moore with 3 receptions for 11 yards. Jerome Ford had 3 receptions for 2 yards. And then the Commanders side of things. Oh boy, Jaden Daniels, 14 completions out of 25 attempts, 238 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Marcus Mariota completed 1 pass out of 3 attempts for -2 yards. Jaden Daniels had 11 carries for 82 yards. Austin Eckler had 6 carries for 67 yards. Jeremy McNichols had 7 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. Then we have Brian Robinson with 7 carries for 18 yards and 2 touchdowns. Marcus Mariota had 2 carries for 2 yards. And Scary Terry had 1 carry for 2 yards. He also had 4 receptions for 112 yards. Then we had Dyami Brown. I think it's Dyami. Kind of said that a little too fast. 2 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown. Austin Eckler had 2 receptions for 30 yards. Then we had Luke McCaffrey with 3 receptions for 19 yards. Zach Ertz had 2 receptions for 10 yards. We had Omalad Zacchaeus with 1 reception for 10 yards. And Bryson Tremaine had 1 reception but had -2 yards. And then we had the Dolphins and my favorite team, the Patriots. Dolphins win at 15-10. Supposedly, it sounds like we're gonna be starting Drake May soon. Oh boy. I mean, if he does well, then great for him. But if he doesn't, then oh boy. But we had Tyler Huntley completing 18 passes out of 31 attempts for 194 yards and a interception. We had Jalen Wright with 13 carries for 86 yards. Raheem Mostert had 19 carries for 80 yards. We had Devon Achane with 3 carries for 18 yards. We had Tyler Huntley with 3 carries for 7 yards. Alec Ingold with 1 carry, 3 yards, and a touchdown. And we had Jonnu Smith carry the ball once but got -1 yard. Tyreek Hill had 6 receptions for 69 yards. Nice. We had Jonnu Smith with 5 receptions for 62 yards. We had Jalen Waddle with 4 receptions for 46 yards. Raheem Mostert had 2 receptions for 18 yards. And Devon Achan had 1 reception but had -1 yard. And then the Patriots. Jacoby Brissett completing 18 passes out of 34 attempts for 160 yards. Ramondre Stevenson, 12 carries, 89 yards, and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson with 6 carries for 52 yards. And Jacoby Brissett with 1 carry for 10 yards. Demario Douglas with 6 receptions, 59 yards. Kayshon Boutte with 2 receptions for 34 yards. Hunter Henry with 2 receptions for 32 yards. Jalen Polk with 1 reception for 13 yards. Almost a touchdown, but called back as well. Austin Hooper, 1 reception for 9 yards. Kendrick Bourne with 1 reception for 6 yards. Antonio Gibson with 1 reception for 4 yards. And Ramondre Stevenson with 4 receptions for 3 yards. Then we had the Jaguars and the Colts going at it in a very, very good game. Jaguars winning at 37-34. Joe Flacco, one of my favorite quarterbacks in the NFL right now. 33 completions out of 44 attempts, 359 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We also had Adonai Mitchell with my phone's being slow. Oh god. I don't know why it did that, like refreshed itself. It had 1 completion, 1 attempt for 24 yards. We had Trey Sermon with 10 carries, 38 yards, and a touchdown. We had Tyler Goodson with 5 carries, 26 yards. Joe Flacco had 3 carries for 20 yards. Ashton Doolin had 1 carry for 9 yards. And Adonai Mitchell had 1 carry for 4 yards. We had Alec Pierce with 3 receptions, 134 yards, and a touchdown. We had Josh Downs with 9 receptions, 69 yards. Nice. Donnie Mitchell with 4 receptions for 38 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. with 5 receptions, 37 yards, and a touchdown. Mo Alley Cox with 2 receptions, 37 yards, and a touchdown. We had Tyler Goodson with 3 receptions, 31 yards. Trey Sermon with 6 receptions for 25 yards. We had Will Mallory with 1 reception for 7 yards. And Alec Ogletree with 1 reception for 5 yards. And that was just for the Colts. Jesus Christ. Now for the Jaguars, we had Trevor Lawrence with 28 completions, 34 attempts for 371 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Tank Bigsby with 13 carries, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Travis Etienne Jr. with 6 carries for 17 yards. Trevor Lawrence with 2 carries for 4 yards. Devin Duvernay had 1 carry for 3 yards. And Ernest Johnson had 1 carry for 1 yard. Brian Thomas Jr., 5 receptions, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Christian Kirk had 4 receptions for 88 yards. Travis Etienne Jr. had 6 receptions for 43 yards. Then we had Gabe Davis with 3 receptions, 38 yards. Tank Bigsby had 1 reception, 28 yards. We had Brenton Strange with 4 receptions, 24 yards, and a touchdown. We had Luke Farrell with 2 receptions for 17 yards. D'Ernest Johnson had 2 receptions for 9 yards. And Jose DeGuara, I believe that is, had, I think that said 1 reception for 2 yards. Yep, 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Bills and the Texans, with the Texans winning this one 23-20. We had Josh Allen complete 9 passes out of 30 attempts for 131 yards and a touchdown. We had James Cook with 20 carries, 82 yards and a touchdown. Josh Allen had 4 carries for 54 yards. We had Ty Johnson with 3 carries for 15 yards. And Curtis Samuel with 1 carry but got -1 yard. Then we had Keon Coleman with, oh boy, I just messed up. My phone. No. Come on, dude. I hate it when it does this. Oh yeah. Keon Coleman, I think I was on. 1 reception, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid with 2 receptions for 34 yards. Mac Hollins with 2 receptions, 27 yards. James Cook with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Ray Davis with 1 reception for 4 yards. Curtis Samuel, 1 reception, but got nothing out of it. And then for the Texans side of things, we had CJ Stroud with 28 completions out of 38 attempts for 331 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Cam Akers had 9 carries, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Dare Ungambale had 15 carries for 30 yards. CJ Stroud had 3 carries for 27 yards. And Tank Dell had 1 carry but lost 5 yards because of it. Stephon Diggs had 6 receptions for 82 yards. Nico Collins had 2 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Dare Ungambale had 6 receptions for 57 yards. Tank Dell had 4 receptions for 38 yards. Dalton Schultz had 4 receptions for 34 yards. Xavier Hutchinson had 2 receptions for 31 yards. Then we had Cade Stover with 2 receptions for 6 yards, and Cam Akers with 2 receptions for 5 yards. Then we had a overtime thriller yet again with the Ravens and the Bengals, with the Ravens winning it 41-38. We had Lamar Jackson 26 completions out of 42 attempts for 348 yards and 4 touchdowns. We had Derrick Henry 15 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Lamar Jackson had 12 carries for 55 yards. Justice Hill had 5 carries for 17 yards. Zay Flowers had 1 carry for 9 yards. And Charlie Kolar had 1 carry for 2 yards. Zay Flowers had 7 receptions for 111 yards. Charlie Kolar had 3 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Rashad Bateman had 4 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. Mark Andrews had 4 receptions for 55 yards. We had Tylan Wallace with 2 receptions for 31 yards. Isaiah Likely had 3 receptions, 13 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Justice Hill had 1 reception for 8 yards. Derrick Henry and Nelson Aguilar had 1 reception for 4 yards. The Bengals, Joe Burrow, 30 completions out of 39 attempts, 392 yards, 5 touchdowns, and an interception. We had Chase Brown with 12 carries for 46 yards. We had Zach Moss with 9 carries for 24 yards. And Joe Burrow carried the ball twice for 1 yard. Jamar Chase had 10 receptions for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. T. Higgins had 9 receptions. Why do I keep on saying carries? 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. Andre Losevis had 1 reception for 39 yards. Mike Gesicki had 2 receptions for 31 yards. Zach Moss had 3 receptions for 28 yards. Eric All Jr. had 2 receptions for 10 yards. And Chase Brown had 3 receptions 8 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had the Raiders and the Broncos, with the Broncos finally beating the Raiders after losing 8 straight games, 34-18. We had Gardner Minshew with 12 completions out of 17 attempts, 137 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Aiden O'Connell got 10 completions out of 20 attempts for 94 yards and a interception. Amir Abdullah had 5 carries, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Alexander Madison had 15 carries for 38 yards. Gardner Minshew had 2 carries for 22 yards. Trey Tucker had 2 carries for 8 yards. And DJ Turner had 1 carry for 5 yards. Brock Bowers had 8 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown. Jacoby Myers had 6 receptions for 72 yards. Alexander Madison had 2 receptions for 23 yards. Trey Tucker had 2 receptions for 18 yards. DJ Turner had 1 reception for 12 yards. And Amir Abdullah had 3 receptions for 9 yards. And for the Broncos side of things, we have Bo Nix, 19 completions out of 27 attempts, 206 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Javonte Williams had 13 carries for 61 yards. Jaleel McLaughlin with 6 carries for 22 yards. Marvin Mims Jr. had 1 carry for 17 yards. And Bo Nix had 8 carries for 9 yards and a touchdown. Javonte Williams had 5 receptions for 50 yards. We had Lil Jordan Humphrey with 2 receptions for 48 yards. Cortland Sutton with 2 receptions for 32 yards. We had Troy Franklin with 1 reception for 20 yards. Adam Trotman with 1 reception for 19 yards. We had Josh Reynolds with 1 reception for 9 yards and a touchdown. We had Nate Atkins with 1 reception for 8 yards. Marvin Mims Jr. with 1 reception for 7 yards. Michael Burton with 1 reception for 5 yards, as well as Lucas Kroll. And last but not least, Jaleel McLaughlin with 3 receptions, 3 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had the closest game of the week with the Cardinals and the 49ers, with the Cardinals win at 24-23. We had Kyler Murray complete 19 passes out of 30 attempts, 195 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. James Conner had 19 carries for 86 yards, and Kyler Murray had 7 carries for 83 yards and a touchdown. We had Michael Wilson with 5 receptions for 78 yards. We had Trey McBride with 6 receptions for 53 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. with 2 receptions, 36 yards. James Conner with 2 receptions for 14 yards. Greg Dortch with 1 reception for 7 yards. We had Tip Raymond with 1 reception for 5 yards. Elijah Higgins with 1 reception, 2 yards, and a touchdown. And Amari Demercado had 1 reception but didn't gain any yards from it. Then we had the 49ers. We had Brock Purdy complete 19 passes out of 35 attempts, 244 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Jordan Mason, 14 carries for 89 yards. Brock Purdy, 4 carries for 33 yards. We had Isaac Garendo with 5 carries for 22 yards, and Deebo Samuel had 3 carries for 9 yards. Brandon Ayuk had 8 receptions for 147 yards. George Kittle had 8 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown. Javon Jennings had 1 reception for 13 yards. Deebo Samuel had 1 reception for 11 yards. And Jordan Mason had 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had the Giants and the Seahawks, with the Giants winning it 29-20. And I give the Giants credit for that one. That's pretty good. Pretty good. And it was going to be a tie game if the Seahawks got the field goal, but it was blocked and it was brought back for a game-sealing touchdown. Daniel Jones had 23 completions out of 34 attempts for 257 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 18 carries, 129 yards. Daniel Jones had 11 carries for 38 yards. We had Eric Gray with 4 carries for 4 yards. And Wan'Dale Robinson had 1 carry for 4 yards. We had Darius Slayton with 8 receptions, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Eric Gray had 3 receptions for 50 yards. We had Theo Johnson with 5 receptions for 48 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson had 6 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown. And Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 1 reception for 1 yard. And for the Seahawks, we had Geno Smith, 28 completions out of 40 attempts for 284 yards and a touchdown. Geno Smith also had 4 carries for 72 yards. Kenneth Walker had 5 carries for 19 yards. And Zach Charbonnet had 2 carries for 11 yards. I don't know why I said 6. But Tyler Lockett, 4 receptions, 75 yards. Kenneth Walker had 7 receptions for 57 yards. DK Metcalf had 4 receptions for 55 yards. Jackson Smith had 4 receptions, 31 yards, and a touchdown. Noah Fant had 3 receptions for 24 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 3 receptions for 19 yards. AJ Barner had 1 reception for 13 yards. Pharaoh Brown had 1 reception for 7 yards. And Jake Bobo had 1 reception for 3 yards. Then we had the Packers and the Rams, with the Packers win at 24-19. Jordan Love had 15 completions out of 26 attempts for 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 8 interception. Josh Jacobs had 19 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. We had Emmanuel Wilson with 6 carries for 24 yards. Jaden Reed with 2 carries for 19 yards. And Jordan Love had 3 carries for 10 yards. Tucker Kraft had 4 receptions, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Reed had 4 receptions for 78 yards. Josh Jacobs had 1 reception for 21 yards. Dontavian Wicks had 2 receptions for 20 yards. Malik Heath had 2 receptions for 14 yards. Bo Melton had 1 reception for 12 yards. And Emmanuel Wilson had 1 reception but got -9 yards from it. Matthew Stafford had 29 completions out of 45 attempts for 260 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. Kyren Williams had 22 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown. Blake Corum had 5 carries for 25 yards. And also Tutu Atwell had 1 carry for 7 yards. Then we had Jordan Whittington with 7 carries, 89 yards. We had Tutu Atwell with 6 carries. I just said carries for Jordan Whittington. 7 receptions for him. Tutu Atwell, 6 receptions for 58 yards. We had Colby Parkinson with 7 receptions for 52 yards. We had Demarcus Robinson with 3 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. We had... Oh, come on. My phone isn't even... This is what happens when... Then we had Hunter Long, 2 receptions for 16 yards. Blake Corum with 1 reception for 8 yards. We had Xavier Smith with 2 receptions, 6 yards. Kyren Williams with 1 reception for 3 yards. Then we had Sunday Night Football with the Cowboys and the Steelers, with the Cowboys winning at 20-17. This game was technically played in 2 different days because we had, it ended at 1 o'clock, I think. Crazy shit. Dak Prescott, 29 completions out of 42 attempts, 352 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Rico Dowdle had 20 carries for 87 yards. Ezekiel Elliott had 6 carries for 17 yards. Hunter Luepke Uh, Lupke, I think, 2 carries, 6 yards. Dak Prescott had 1 carry for 3 yards. CeeDee Lamb had 1 carry for 2 yards. And Cavante Turpin had 1 carry but lost 6 yards because of it. Jalen Tolbert had 7 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown. Jake Ferguson had 6 receptions for 70 yards. CeeDee Lamb had 5 receptions for 62 yards. Cavante Turpin had 4 receptions for 50 yards. Rico Dowdle had 2 receptions for 27 yards and a touchdown. Brevin Spanford had two 2 receptions for 20 yards. Hunter Lupke had 1 reception for 18 yards. What is that? Is that Jonathan Brooks? Or is that someone else? Let me turn my Wi-Fi off. That might be the reason. Oh, Jalen Brooks. Then we had Luke Schoonmaker with 1 reception for 8 yards. Yeah, Jalen Brooks, if I didn't say it, had 1 reception for 10 yards. Then we had the Steelers. Justin Fields, 15 completions out of 27 attempts, 131 yards, 2 touchdowns. And we also had Kyle Allen complete 1 pass out of 1 attempt for 19 yards. Najee Harris had 14 carries for 42 yards. Justin Fields had 6 carries for 27 yards. We had Aaron Shapklin with 4 carries for 14 yards. And we had Jonathan Ward with 2 carries for 9 yards. Najee Harris had 2 receptions for 35 yards. Van Jefferson had 3 receptions for 26 yards, as well as George Pickens. Connor Hayward had 2 receptions for 23 yards and a touchdown. Pat Freiermuth had 3 receptions for 22 yards and a touchdown. We had Brandon Johnson with 1 reception for 9 yards. We had Calvin Austin with 1 reception for 6 yards. We had Darnell Washington with 1 reception for 5 yards. And Zach Frazier had 0 receptions but had -2 yards. And for the last game of this week, we had the Chiefs and the Saints, with the Chiefs winning at 26-13 to stay undefeated. We had Derek Carr complete 18 passes out of 28 attempts, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 8 interception. We also had Jake Haener come in and complete 2 passes out of 7 attempts, Jesus Christ, with 17 yards. We had Alvin Kamara with 11 carries, 26 yards, Jake Haener with 2 carries for 11 yards, and Jamal Williams with 2 carries for 9 yards. Rashid Shaheed had 4 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 6 receptions for 40 yards. We had Juwan Johnson with 5 receptions for 31 yards. We had Foster Moranu with 2 receptions, 13 yards, and a touchdown. Chris Olave had 2 receptions for 10 yards. And I believe that's Mason Tipton with 1 reception for 2 yards. And for the Chiefs side of things, we had Patrick Mahomes, 28 completions out of 39 attempts, 331 yards, and a interception. Kareem Hunt had 27 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Patrick Mahomes had 6 carries for 22 yards. Carson Steele had 5 carries for 12 yards. Xavier Worthy had 1 carry for 3 yards and a touchdown. Juju Smith had 7 receptions for 130 yards. Travis Kelce had 9 receptions for 70 yards. Mecole Hardman had 4 receptions, 33 yards. Noah Gray had 2 receptions for 29 yards. Xavier Worthy had 3 receptions for 25 yards. Sam J. Perine had 1 reception for 24 yards. Kareem Hunt had 1 reception for 15 yards. And Jody Portson had 1 reception for 5 yards. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment, do really whatever you want to do. And tomorrow will be the predictions video, so stick around for that. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video. See you around.